Okay, so welcome to Sattva Project, Open Heart, Open Mind. In our interview today, we have Lyse Mai somebody that is really impressive with a wonderful writing. So briefly, I will introduce you to Lyse Mai. So Lyse grew up in Nelson, New Zealand, as the third of four children. Her known world was abruptly shaken when she had a brief but profound spiritual experience as a child. A few years later, she was shaken yet again when dragged out to sea by tidal currents and almost drowned. These two events were the catalyst for a pronounced intention to discover the meaning of life. Driven by this deep inner longing, she traveled to Australia and later to Tibet, Nepal, and then India, where she met her master, a Tibetan lama of high standing. In his presence, she was able to rediscover what she had glimpsed as a child. Over a period of 2 decades, Lyse stayed near her teachers in various locations in the Himalayas. So welcome, Lyse. We welcome you to share with us your beautiful experience. And before I even start this talk and do the questions I would love to do to you to inspire other women in the path, I would briefly ask you to introduce yourself. Just talk a bit about yourself after my words in this introduction, please.
Okay, well, greetings everybody who's tuned in, and thank you so much for doing that. And thank you, especially Sonia, for giving me the opportunity to share with all of you. So I'm a New Zealander who had intense experiences as a child that led me to question the meaning of life, and that pretty much propelled me through a whole bevy of experiences that eventually led me to Tibet, then Nepal, and then India, where I eventually met some very great Tibetan masters. So yeah, I'm just an ordinary person who has been able to lead a relatively extraordinary life. So I feel very privileged for the life that I've been able to lead, that's for sure.
A very
and
inspiring
to share.
Very inspiring to others also. When I first heard about your experience, I was totally overwhelmed. So it was really the first step to move me to your books. And then by reading your words, it really touched my heart. And that's why I think many women need to know your work and you a bit more deeply so they can feel very, very inspired. So tell us about yourself and how you first get in touch with the Buddhism. Why Buddhism, this?
Right, well, I didn't have any particular intention to become a Buddhist, but various little life circumstances, a sense of resonance with the values of Buddhism, I guess, would have been there quite naturally from pretty early on. So all these things, you know, eventually led me to the feet of my masters, and seeing them, probably more than anything else, was the catalyst for taking the steps that I eventually took.
I mean, you felt inspired by the masters and then you follow the path because you align your ideas with the purpose of Buddhism, but also because of the inspiration of your teachers.
Well, I was, you know, I had an experience as a child that revealed a very great truth. I was so young then, I didn't have the mental equipment. I couldn't put things into words. I couldn't understand intellectually what had happened to me. But what I realized in that during that experience was an unshakable truth. You know, had complete certainty in what was revealed, and that never left me. And the mystery of that, because you know, that wasn't stable. It was an experience that came and then it went. A few years after that, when I nearly drowned, I realized, you know, that life is so fragile, and that is a huge revelation for a very young child, you know, to confront death at a really early age, when everything that all your energy, all your life force is geared towards new experience, growth, everything to do with positivity in life. But suddenly you realize it can be cut off just like that, just a snap of a finger. That was a huge motivator, and it brought up questions in my mind, along with other life events that happened along the way. All of these things gave me a huge push towards jumping out of the nest very early in life. I was 15 when I left home. In these days, that's really young. We had a lot of freedom back in those days, I have to say. That has changed somewhat. So yeah, it wasn't long before I was out of the home. I was living with a man who was 5 years my senior. And although he was a great protector and he really helped me along the way, he basically took care of me during those early years. Nevertheless, I was very young, extremely young, and I left New Zealand, and he and I traveled around Australia together for some time. So we were always engaged in meeting new groups of people. There were a lot of different circumstances that came and went. There were all kinds of experiences that young people of all generations have, you know. But that came to a point when I was 18, when I suddenly realized, well, okay, you know, I've had a dabble at those things, but is that all there is? You know, there was a big question mark in my mind. It didn't seem, and I also realized around that time that I had absolutely no idea who I am, because the boyfriend of that time was very charismatic, and he had been the center of my world, and you know, everything sort of revolved around that. So all of this came upon me quite in quite a condensed way when we reached the top of Australia around Darwin. And I thought, okay, I started to have, you know, little inklings of doubt. There were questions in my mind, and there was a renewed sense that I needed to do something more. So it wasn't very long afterwards that I moved to Cairns, and my boyfriend followed me. We lived together for some time, but it was never going to work because by that time, I was really intent on investigating further and learning how to meditate.
Yeah.
And I ended up in a little cabin in the forest. So all these things happened. You know, there were life was going on. Eventually, you know, that ended. I went down to Sydney. There was different things happening, music training, etc., etc. But all of it seemed so empty. None of it fulfilled me. And I had so much to be grateful for. And even though I was very, very aware of that, I was also very, very aware of an inner sense of emptiness, of something that absolutely needed to be filled. Some inner hunger, some longing. And that was very powerful. And that was what propelled me to make the journey to Tibet, that moved through Tibet quite quickly and down into Nepal and then India. So I sort of fumbled my way through to the feet of a very great, well, a number of very great Buddhist lamas.
Oh, yes.
And well, they were Buddhist, they were Buddhist. Who knows, if I had met a very holy Hindu person, it could have been something else,
Yes.
It could have been.
Yes.
So I had very clear idea of what I was after. I knew that I wanted to discover the truth about my existence, about why we are here. So it didn't bother me too much in what form that truth was going to appear in my life. But it so happened that it came in the form of these great masters.
Very blessed. A very blessed form to happen.
So that's why Buddhism.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
Very blessed. Yes. Wonderful.
Yes.
I really rejoice.
Yes.
Well, so by realizing that, what were the challenges you had to face by living close with great masters? I mean, you had a chance to live close with great masters. I would start by here. Can you describe us or let us know, for example, how did you meet your teacher, previous Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche? And Chatral Rinpoche.
So that happened. Yes, that Chatral Rinpoche was a bit later. I went on a trek into the Everest Khumbu with a number of friends. And when we were coming back down on our way down to Kathmandu, we stopped a night in Namche Bazaar. And I woke up very early, much earlier than anyone else. And I just got up on an impulse and started walking towards the north. And there was a very well-defined path going that way, but it was not a tourist route or anything of that kind. When I came up onto that pass and crossed over the ridge, I could make out a tiny little building way up on the side of the mountain, and it really had a sort of magnetic appeal for me. I thought, what is that? And I could just make out sort of vague colors of something like a temple. I mean, it would have had to have been. Only temples were crazy enough to be in such high remote places, So then I made a decision that I was going to try and go up there. The people that I was with were staying for a day or two in Namche, and then they were going down. So the next day I knew they would be resting. So I took a day pack and I climbed up to that place and discovered that there were a couple of Western guys staying there. That was a big surprise. Way up in the middle of nowhere. And they were so not pleased to see me.
Yeah, I can imagine.
They felt like their special place had been sprung. And this woman had just appeared out of nowhere. With a big smile, looking totally gleeful, like, oh, like I've just won the jackpot. Very spectacular place, associated with Lama Zopa. It was the place where he, in a previous incarnation, had practiced and done his retreats. Wow. There was a cave behind that place. So, I saw that place. Now, I went down again that same day and I told my friends, look, I'm not coming with you to Lukla. I'm going to come down after a few days, because they told me in that temple that I could stay if I wanted to. So I gathered my things and I went straight back up there. Much to the great displeasure of those two particular men. But they soon left. And I got their room.
Oh, wow.
And their room had a window over the temple that looked out. It was like being in an aeroplane. Wow. It was really amazing. So while I was there, I was spending time just sitting and practicing meditation, just being silent, being quiet in Lama Zopa's cave. And I took careful note of the photographs, the framed photographs that were on the altar. And amongst them was a small black and white photograph that had not been framed.
Mm.
And the face in that photograph is very striking to me. And it was actually a picture of Kalu Rinpoche.
Mm.
And I thought, gee, who is that Lama,
Yeah.
And so I made it a point to ask the caretaker, and he said, oh, that's Kalu Rinpoche. And I said, is he alive? And he said, I think so. Where does he live? Darjeeling. So
Yeah.
then, it was like, the chain of events started from there.
Okay.
So when I met Kalu Rinpoche, he very pointedly mentioned to me that there was going to be a great empowerment of Kala Chakra in Bodh Gaya that winter, and that His Holiness would be giving it. But I didn't really have any thought about going to that in my mind. And I took leave of him. I had a very pleasant time in his presence. Ostensibly, I was going back to Kathmandu to catch a flight back to Sydney to return to do my classes and, my students and things like that. So I was going back to Australia, basically. But I got to the bus stand, and instead of getting on the bus that would take me to the border of Nepal, I got on a bus that took me to Bodh Gaya. And that was how I came eventually to meet His Holiness Khyentse Rinpoche, who appeared before us, a huge and vast gathering of people, probably the biggest that Bodh Gaya had seen.
Yeah.
That was I think it was the very first Kala Chakra that His Holiness Dalai Lama gave there. And on that very first day, after the initial ceremonies had taken place, a car pulled up and the door swung open, and out climbed Khyentse Rinpoche, huge. And it was as though, well, how can one describe that moment? It's, you're seeing someone who's been, you're meeting them again. It's not the first time. And there's, that feeling. It's a deep feeling. And I literally leapt onto my feet.
Yeah.
That at that very moment, the jellings started to play and the radongs, and everybody got up and began prostrating. But I was the first one to get up. And it was completely involuntary. I couldn't help myself. So that was how I first laid eyes upon the Master.
That's incredible. And in such an amazing place, in such an unfortunate circumstance, that is the Kala Chakra empowerment, and in Bodh Gaya, it's brilliant. It's such a wonderful, positive karma. That is great. I rejoiced. You were describing, and it's a huge feeling of a joy was arising while I was hearing you, Liz. Thank you so much for sharing that. So how do you felt it was being near a master? Because after that, you searched for Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, you took refuge with Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, and you started to practice more diligently. And how was to be next to a master of, like previous Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, with this huge dimension, not only physical, but especially his spiritual dimension, his aura, his, I don't even have words. I don't.
For me, because of my connection with him, I was very overawed by Khyentse Rinpoche. He was never at any moment, not even a single second, for me, an ordinary person. Of course, Khyentse Rinpoche had a very large Sangha. He had many Tibetan students. He had many Himalayan students from all across the mountain areas, Nepali students, Indians even, and many Westerners from all around the world. and the Westerners would come and go, but there was a core group around him of older students, many of whom had been Khyentse Rinpoche's students,
Yes.
with whom I became quite close, and they were like my core Western Sangha. And then for a period of months, many different people came and went. So the dynamics of those various people were all very different. And one was, you know, I was incredibly green. I knew nothing, you know, so I made lots of mistakes, lots of blunders. I think I learned reasonably quickly because I watched carefully and I listened well. And I was, you know, very anxious to make a good impression. I mean, it became, you know, very apparent to me how important that was. And according to that, according to the way that one presented oneself within that Sangha, that was how you were treated.
Yes, yes.
So things like dress code and mannerisms, behavior, way of speaking, respect towards the lama, all these things, you know, one had to be very mindful of on all occasions. So being near a master like Khyentse Rinpoche, well, for me personally, it was, you know, he simply became the center of my world, and that world revolved around him. So when he was in Bodhanath, he did spend several months in Bhutan each year, but the rest of the time he would be in Bodhanath or in Bodh Gaya on a couple of occasions, but mostly it was at his monastery in Chichen. Then I made it my business to be there and to be around. And so I was hanging around in the monastery from early morning until you know, they closed shop basically. Yeah. So I ingratiated myself to Matthew Ricard, who was already, you know, an old student of Khyentse Rinpoche's and very active in many, many ways. And I was, you know, pottering around helping Matthew and in the office, and then, you know, I could slip into Rinpoche's rooms at any time that I sensed anything of interest was taking place.
Wow.
And be part of it.
That's so wonderful. What a bless. That's wonderful. That's blessing.
I don't know that I was welcome all the time, but I definitely pushed myself in there.
I understand
yes,
you.
It's marvelous, yeah.
So you felt like overwhelmed, like something was, how can I put this in words? Like something in you was just like reborning, renewing. I don't know. What is the proper word to the feeling that you were living over there?
Well, the thing with Khyentse Rinpoche was, and nobody could really deny this when they saw him in person. Did you see him in person, Sonia? Did you meet him in person?
No.
Okay.
I never met previous Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. Only Dilgo Khyentse Yangtze Rinpoche I met, not previous Dilgo Khyentse.
The previous Dilgo Khyentse was utterly striking. There was nothing ordinary about him. Nothing. So he wasn't one of these great masters, and there were many who could slip and melt into a crowd. Yeah. He wasn't like that. He was striking, and his presence was striking. So everyone was affected in some way or other by that presence. For me, I always felt that he knew everything about me, everything. The good, the bad, the ugly. You know, and I always felt, often I felt, you know, there's just so many different feelings. Because when we're near a master like that, it's like being under a magnifying glass.
Yes.
You know, everything heats up. Another analogy is like, it's like, you know, you're boiling the milk so that everything that's inside's going to come out.
Yes, yes, yes.
And so very intense personal inner experiences were taking place, and also quite intense experiences between the Sangha members. So you're in a real melting pot of dynamic energies. But, you know, I would get up in the morning, I would make a beeline to the monastery, straight to Rinpoche's room, and I would peep in his door, and he would go like this with this huge finger. You'd see me, and he'd go. From that moment on, I would know that he would know from looking at me what was going on, and I would know by the look in his eye that he knew. And then he would put his hand on my head and the day would begin. And often I had the very great privilege of just being able to sit in a corner and do my practice while everything was going on there, whatever it was. So, yeah, there was just that sense that he was the overpowering, you know, the central light and Lord of my life at that time. Yeah. So that involved complete devotion.
Yes.
But also on occasion, trembling fear.
Yeah.
Moments of guilt. All kinds of experiences. You know, you go through everything, just as one would expect. When one has encountered an authentic master of that level of realization. Yeah.
This
so in a nutshell.
In a nutshell. Anyway, how do you felt as a Western woman going to the East and living in these environments? How do you felt there as a woman? Did you realize some difference in treatment between women and male and female practitioners and male practitioners? Even in the Eastern society, what do you felt about women? What did you saw? What did you live there? Can you share with us a bit about that?
Well, I mean, I came from a democratic society where we have always enjoyed great freedoms. So New Zealand, Australia, perhaps in the day when I was being raised, 60s, 70s, it was somewhat patriarchal, but these things, they are still quite rife in our societies, despite the fact that we live in these, you know, wonderful democracies as such. However, when I came to Nepal and India and was living closely amongst Tibetans, it was very obvious very early on that the lamas and the monks, you know, the men had a much more privileged position. But, you know, as a Western woman, one was treated a little differently from perhaps how the local women would have been treated. So this was also a factor. Yeah. So there are many things around that question, you know, good things and not so good things. I had to find my way through that. It was a bit of a minefield. And I don't think that ever really changed, actually. It was always a bit of a minefield because you never really knew what was going to come up in other people. What circumstances. That's the incredible thing I found about living in India and in the proximity of accomplished practitioners, was that there was this quality of dynamism, of always needing to expect the unexpected, to be extremely mindful and aware. So, you know, that sense of was there. So certainly, yes, there were differences, yeah, in that way.
You realized, for example, according to you could see by yourself the different approach and mentality, for example, in the way men treat women in those countries, because it's a cultural question. It has a lot of cultural also.
Well, when I started doing my retreats, and this was after His Holiness Khyentse Rinpoche passed away.
Yes, now we are going to talk about Chatral Rinpoche, the amazing
yeah,
Chatral Rinpoche.
I had
yes, I will be delighted to hear about this. Yes.
Yeah, I had received so much from Khyentse Rinpoche. You know, my cup was full, my cup was overflowing, and there was no way that I could really understand the profundity of everything that I had received. I hadn't had a chance to digest or assimilate. He had just been giving and giving and giving and filling that cup. And there were moments of very intense connection with Khyentse Rinpoche that were mind-changing, but they had nothing to do with conventional teachings and empowerments. Yes. They were silent transmissions. Mm-hmm. So after he passed away, I felt the only way that I could repay his kindness and move forward in some way that was that could be meaningful would be to begin to practice the Dharma, you know, to take out from all of that something that I could resonate with on a personal level and practice it and accomplish it in a deep way. So I went into a retreat, and during that time met Chatral Rinpoche. Fundamentally, staying near my masters was the entire reason for taking on the whole cultural thing. Yeah. It wasn't because I was, you know, fascinated by Tibetan culture or, you know, deeply interested in the philosophy of Buddhism or even the formal and conventional side of Buddhism. I have to state that quite honestly. You know, I was very much impressed by seeing for the very first time in my life what a human being can become. Yeah. That was very, very evident in His Holiness Khyentse Rinpoche, because he was like at the apex of what a human being can achieve from a spiritual point of view, from a truly human point of view. Yeah. And beyond that, you could see that, you could feel that. To me, that was absolutely extraordinary. I couldn't think of anything else that could approach how extraordinary that was. Yeah. What an amazing thing in our midst. You know, that's what these great masters are for us. Yeah. You know, we can, you know, all the pop stars in the world, all the charismatic presidents, actors, actresses, all these people, they have nothing on the power and the majesty, the natural, spontaneous inner majesty of a fully realized being. And so this was the compelling factor. This was the reason why I put up with so much stuff. You had to put up with a lot to live there. It wasn't easy. Yeah. But that was why I did it. And that was always first and foremost in my mind.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is what I would like you to share with us. What do you have to put up with? Because that is something I'm sure many people with enough devotion that want to follow a genuine teacher and is willing to go through the most difficult things because of the devotion aspect and because of the willing to transform themselves and take the best of the example of the teacher in the path. But then this is not a wonderland world. It can be even extremely complicated, harmful, I can say. So would you like to share with us about that? Because with open heart, we need to embrace this kind of difficult questions as an
Well,
awareness generator.
with every master and with every sangha, those challenges would be different.
Mm-hmm.
They would be quite unique. So there's no sort of branding here,
Yeah.
you know. I think my message to women would be that, you know, when you're in the presence of an authentic master, it does accelerate the burning of our karma, our individual karma, and that is it. You know, that means that we've come into an environment that's very dynamic, and that can be, you know, a lot of things can happen in a short period of time. These experiences were wide and vast. It's hard for me to pinpoint, you know, details here.
Yes, yes.
But I think any accomplished master will, that, you know, those people who are around that master will have some inkling of what I'm speaking about.
Yes.
In Khyentse Rinpoche, those challenges were quite different.
Yes.
I mean, that was a very intense personal connection that I had with him.
Yes, yes.
So that was a lot of dynamic between him and me.
Yes, yes.
With Chatral Rinpoche, I stepped into a role of moving with Rinpoche very closely on a day-to-day basis over a number of years. So that again was so very, very different. You know, Khyentse Rinpoche was, Chatral Rinpoche was always, you know, a divine figure, a little bit, you know, just, as I said, not an ordinary being.
Yeah.
And certainly I never thought of Chatral Rinpoche as an ordinary being. But because our interconnection was so organic,
Yes.
you know, through in life circumstances, nothing was contrived there. I never asked. On one occasion, I asked for formal teachings from Chatral Rinpoche, but otherwise the teaching was being with the lama.
Yes.
And every day, every moment, every situation with the lama was the teaching, and he was marvelous to move with. You know, if you want to see what a truly realized being is like,
yes,
in human form, to move with him was to witness that, and to be continually humbled by that.
I can imagine. I don't have idea, because I have such a deep, strong devotion and admiration to Chatral Rinpoche and to his amazing way of relating with things. It was so peculiar, so unique. Really, it is something that I deeply admire in Chatral Rinpoche, is his ability to stay away from politics, to never be like conventional behavior, and to be, I don't know, for me is genuine, totally, I don't know, pure. It's something that is, it is what it is. It is just this. It's something that you have to do. I don't know. I wish I could have met him also.
I was always profoundly moved by his incredible practicality.
Yeah.
I never met anyone who was so down to earth and practical. He was so sensible. And but with that good, solid, earthy sensibility, there was incredible learning and wisdom. And that was always apparent.
Yeah.
So he always moved from that place. So you know, you couldn't get flighty around him. You couldn't, you know, he was a very earthy Lama, and he expected that in his students.
Yes.
He was quite particular in that way. You know, he wouldn't have dealt with anyone with unstable mind because he simply didn't feel that they were ready for the ultimate teachings.
Yes.
He didn't feel that the time had come for them, so he simply didn't deal with them. But Dilgo Khyentse had all kinds of people coming within his purview, and of all shapes and sizes and stages of the path. So each Lama has his own way and his own particular mode of activity in the world. And it's not that it's anything better or anything less, it's different. And it meets a need within that niche. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
this
it was all about
so amazing.
The masters. It was I was quite happy to deal with everything, the physical difficulties, because I was often ill, the cultural difficulties, the difficulties with visas, the difficulties with money. there were many things, you know, that we had to face, but we did all of that because we knew somehow that the power, the blessing, the grace of the master would protect, and it did.
Yeah.
Powerfully. On occasion.
Definitely.
Smackingly, magically. You know, they're just, yeah. So through the great privilege of being able to spend all those years in their vicinity, well, faith did not diminish.
Yes,
it
devotion
was greatly enhanced. It was enhanced.
Yes, I understand. But yeah,
even more so in retreat, I have to say. Even more so when I began practicing and I began to really be able to comprehend the teachings that had been bestowed, then then the tears would begin to flow spontaneously at any time during practice.
Yes.
You know. Yeah.
That is huge blessing.
Yes, it is. Yes.
It is.
But that too came with many, many challenges. That too.
Yeah.
You know.
But tell me about those challenges, Liz. Tell me about those challenges you have to face as a woman, and especially as a Western, in a context like, for example, Darjeeling. Living with the
when I
environment there.
When I first met Chatral Rinpoche in 1991, it was very soon after Khyentse Rinpoche passed away, because I had gone into retreat in Paping in Nepal, and he was living at the bottom of that hill. So when I first moved to Darjeeling, Rinpoche wanted me to go to a retreat place called Dharma, but I became very ill. I had hepatitis A and was very ill for quite some time. And so Rinpoche offered me a place in the first monastery that he had, and really, apart from Yanglasha in Nepal, it was really the only temple that he ever maintained. Someone had offered that to him in a place called Your Bungalow, and he gave me a little cabin to live in. And initially, I just stayed there for some time, and was coming and going. And then one day, Rinpoche said to me, well, you know, because he called me Sangye Doma, the Swiss Khyentse Rinpoche, given me that name, and Chatral Rinpoche's lineage is Sangye.
Oh,
So
yes,
he'd
yes,
always
Sangye.
been, and
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
you know, it was very appropriate that I was called Sangye Drama. So
Mm,
he said, well, Sangye Drama, now that this is your place. You
mm.
can have this place. I'm giving this place to you, and you don't have to worry about, you know, moving and where are you going to stay and how are you going to pay and all this sort of thing. So I thought, wow, it was so unexpected, and it was totally miraculous. So that was where I was living, Jaw Bungalow. But a few months afterwards, I had gone to the caretaker when I was about to go down to Siliguri. Rinpoche had come from Nepal. I was going to spend the winter months down there. And I had said to the caretaker, look, I'm locking up my place, started. I was just a courtesy, really. And he hadn't realized that Rinpoche had given me that cabin.
Oh.
And he hit the roof. Now, this was an old man in his 80s. He always wore 2 trousers.
Mm.
His name was Lolu. He's long gone. And
No.
he was a relative of Rinpoche's. And, you know, one way or another, from that moment on, he was determined to get rid of me.
Oh, yeah.
So that was a very kind of shocking
Mm-hmm.
encounter for me. And as soon as I became aware of his hostility towards me
Yes.
as a Western woman, and his not accepting, because you have to remember Rinpoche was married and he had 2 daughters.
Yeah.
So he always moved from a very, very different place. But the others around him were still very conventional minded.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know, they hadn't, it was highly unusual that I, as a Western woman, was staying
Yeah.
in that monastery because there were monks and lamas there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it was an unusual situation. And so, yes, this obstacle came. And so I let go of the place. I simply went to Rinpoche and I said, I cannot, you know, there's
Accept.
conflict and I will relinquish it. And he had already pointed me towards Dasma Retreat Centre. But due to illness, I hadn't gone there. So slowly, when my time of moving with him finally drew towards a close and I felt that deep inner urge to go into retreat, then I moved down there. And I built a little place that was about 50 meters from the main monastery. That little place in the forest was not really known to any but the locals. It was an old temple. It was tucked away in amongst Norfolk pines and bamboo forests. You'd never know it was there. It was certainly not on the tourist route in any way. But it was this great spot on a ridge. And so I decided to build my little retreat house there. Rinpoche gave me the choice of building on Gompa land. But in the end, because of what I had encountered in Jaw Bungalow, I actually rented the land just across the footpath, about 2 feet away, on a local farmer's land. I didn't want to encounter that problem again.
Yes.
Or the possibility of that problem, least of all when I was setting up for a retreat.
Yes.
So I took that decision, and that was a very, very good decision. But I was somewhat isolated from the monastery. I had, you know, being a Westerner and loving my views, I had chosen a spot that was a little bit down from the stupa and that had amazing views. You know, just I could see from Everest to, you know, the far corners of Bhutan, basically.
Wow.
And all the valleys of Sikkim, and of course Kanchenjunga was right in front of my eyeballs.
Yeah.
So that's why I had chosen that place. But a good friend of mine, a Lama friend who was looking out for me, he was my looking out person. He was the one who protected me and helped me a lot through all those years. He wanted someone to be nearby, and he built another retreat house nearby prior to building his own. And a lama came down there, and he began a traditional 3-year, 3-month, 3-day retreat. So that lama, who had come from the monastery in Jor Bungalow, was not able to complete his retreat. He did not achieve stability in his practice. He was not stable of mind. And very soon after he moved in, he started to experience a lot of obstacles in his practice, which he couldn't overcome. And he had so much support. He had lamas that came down from Jor Bungalow to help him. He had local people who were sponsoring him, who were bringing him food, who were making monetary offerings, who in every way supported him because he was wearing robes.
Yes.
And I was a few feet away, but completely on my own. Even so, that lama started to lose his mind, and he became very threatening towards me. And threatening of my life. And I had to put up with him for 2 years. So every time I walked past his little cabin, and this is what can happen in a retreat. Yes. These are intense places. That's not all peace and joy and rose petals.
Yes.
I was fearful of my life.
Yes.
Because at night he would come and stand at my gate and tell me, he couldn't speak English, but I could speak enough Tibetan to understand, that he was going to kill me. You know, that I was creating some obstacle for him there. He thought that I was doing something. Of course I wasn't. Yes. But he had it in his mind that I was. So this kind of thing came up. And so it took a lot to get through that and to stick through that. And I think a lot of people didn't think I could, or that I would. And there were other obstacles as well. There were other things that were very, very challenging that came up, but very circumstantial, you know, I mean, not in the purview of an ordinary retreat place. You know, this is very circumstantial to where I was and to the lama that I was, you know, receiving guidance from. So, yeah. I stuck with it, and that particular lama left before he could complete his retreat. And then I was really able to relax. And it's ironic because he was put there as a protection, but it wasn't until he left that I felt safe.
Yeah. Really, it's incredible because you were saying, you were saying something so deep, you know, like you said, this is not like the pink world, only roses. And people have this idea that when you go to retreat, or when you go to do the 3-year retreat or mountain retreat, that is something that is, oh, this is amazing. I think that must be very, very challenging. And I think it's the kind of step that is not for everybody. I mean, everybody can go to retreat, but retreat is not for everybody, definitely.
No, you have to be ready. One has to be ready.
Yeah.
And when I had made that step, I knew that I was. And I had the great good fortune that Chatral Rinpoche came down to Dasmal twice. Shortly after I had built my cabin, he came down and he blessed the cabin. And I requested, you know, very clearly, very pointedly and directly and verbally, you know, to receive his guidance and blessing and protection during that time. So I never doubted that, despite what was happening, and everything was happening. I mean, someone was outside my gate at night saying they were going to murder me. You know, was I going to leave? Was I going to get up and say, look, I can't deal with it? No, I wasn't. I wasn't going to. I wasn't going to give in that easily. So I had a very, very clear agenda. And I think that any woman going into a Dharma practice in any situation, in any place in the world, as long as she has clarity as to why she's going, what the goals are, what's important. And deep, of course, deep and great trust in her teacher, master, then she's going to get through that stuff, you know.
Yes.
She's going to be able to do that. But by the time I came into that retreat, I'd already gone through a lot. So much more than I've ever written about or would be able to write about.
Like if your emotions were being just tested all the time, and your resistance, your determination all the time, shaken. It's not easy to be shaken.
Yeah.
It's not easy to be shaken.
And it's on the deepest level.
Yeah.
It's on the very, very deepest level that we are tested out. It's, you know, I think when we make that decision that we're going to follow the Dharma, and one often hears this expression in Tibetan texts, it's like entering a bamboo, a snake entering a bamboo.
Yes.
So it can go into the bamboo, but it can only go one way.
Yeah.
And it's like that with the Dharma. You know, once you enter in, once you take refuge, once you commit yourself, you're in it, because you cannot unsee what you have seen. You cannot not know what you have known deeply inside, what you've experienced in the presence of your master.
Yes.
Certain things become very apparent. So, yeah, somehow we have to find our way through all of that.
Yes, this is very, very challenging, but you really need to have a deep devotion, and you have to have deep determination to not be led drawn by your emotions during the process, because this is very intense. I never been in a mountain retreats, but I believe it's deeply intense, and you have to deal with things, as you were saying, like survival mode. You feel your survival always threatened. And especially if you have somebody saying that he's going to kill you or something like that, it's extremely disturbing. It's like, wow, you need to really have a very stable mind to deal with that daily, all the time. So it's quite challenging for everybody, but for a Western woman in that territory, that's even more challenging.
Yeah. And on top of that, the people that were in the temple, in the main compound of the temple, could hear what was happening. They could hear him threatening me, but no one at any time ever came down and even shone a torch down there. I mean, I was in a place that at that time had no electricity. It was pitch black at night. So I was incredibly vulnerable. And I realized these people aren't going to help me.
And why do you think they do that? Why do you think they didn't went there to help you, or at least to offer you
They were afraid.
protection?
They were afraid.
Okay.
One of the things about Lyse Mai was it was an old monastery. And below that monastery, and not very far, probably not more than 20 meters away, was a very old cremation ground. So that's where all the local people of the area came with the corpses to burn the corpses. That was happening right there. You know, and that's very real.
Yes.
When you get those processions, you get those corpses being taken, they would come straight past my little cabin and work their way up to the Gompa. So I was constantly reminded.
Yes.
Of, you know,
wow.
And then if I went, you know, after everybody had left, the fire would still be burning. There might be one or two people down there. Maybe everyone would have left, but you could see what was taking place on the pyre. it wasn't all covered up and hidden away, you know, in a concrete building
Yes,
somewhere
yes,
in the
yes, yes.
suburbs, like our
Yes, yes.
crematoriums are in the West.
Mm.
You know, everything's out in the open.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Eyeballs bursting, you know, limbs popping off and stuff. You know,
Yeah,
they were,
yeah, 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 yeah.
it was all going on there. It was very, very real. And so this was a very dynamic place to be practicing the Dharma. And, you know,
Yes,
it was,
definitely.
yeah, there was no sense of, at any time, taking it easy. There
Yeah.
wasn't ever that feeling.
Very, very, very
Again,
good points.
yeah.
Let's pick this point and try to see this like, you know, did you felt a big difference in your path just because you didn't wear robes?
Yes, of course. Yeah, a big difference. Because in the East, um, you know, people judge you instantaneously. I mean, they do around the world, but even more so in the East
Yes,
on
yes.
appearances.
Mm-hmm.
And people in robes, the ordained in the East,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
from, you know, for millennia, have just been respected. In general, there's that respect there for the robes.
Mm.
So if I had shaved my head and taken on the robes, perhaps my situation would have been very different. But that, you know, Chatral Rinpoche did not ordain, and he
Yeah.
was not big on that. The lamas who were around him were old and close students.
Mm-hmm.
They lived very freely
Mm.
within his clearly defined rules,
Yeah, yeah.
which were stated in clear writing above each of his
Yes.
places. You know, no
Mm-hmm.
meat,
Yes. Yes.
this, that, and the next thing. So yeah, that was all very clearly defined. There were no, you know, there weren't the, however many it is, you know, X hundred number of vows and requisites of, you know, fully ordained
Yes, yes,
monastics.
yes, yes, yes,
Nothing of
yes.
that kind in this situation. So it was slightly different. So yes. So if perhaps if I'd been in robes, I would have received very different treatment. But I was not. So it took years and years of proximity, basically, of, you know, the locals going by with their woven baskets to get
Yes.
fodder for their cows or their goats or
Mm-hmm.
their chooks or whatever it was in the village that was going on there. And they would come by 2 or 3 times a day past my little house,
Yes.
and they could see, they could hear, they could witness
Yes.
firsthand.
Yes.
And that didn't work immediately. It took time.
Yes.
It took consistency and time. And the fact that I was just there doing it,
Mm-hmm.
that slowly changed their minds
Yes.
from, you know, the deeply ingrained cultural perspective
Yes. Yes.
to one of immediate experience of a different kind of activity taking place in their midst. And so slowly, that respect was definitely gained. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it took time.
Yeah. Even that, you need to be very patient. I mean, you get recognized by your
Very patient.
effort and your practice, but with time, and almost you need to prove that you could bear everything, so they can really treat you same level as the Easterns, right? Yeah, it's kind of that. Unfortunately, I mean, um, from a Western perspective, I mean, we have different open minds related to many issues. In the East, they are much more traditional in their cultures in accepting the entrance of new thing. Maybe because also they want to preserve
Mm-hmm.
some things, and maybe also because many people misunderstood many things, and I don't know. This is
And
just an
because there
idea.
really wasn't, in the East, there really was no facility at the
Yeah,
time when I was there, which could accommodate Westerners, let alone
yeah,
Western
yeah,
women. It just
yeah.
wasn't. I always looked on with a pang and longing in my heart at everyone else, because they were always, you know, Tibetans or Nepalese, or, you know, there were local practitioners, lamas from all over the Himalayas that came and went, but they always had one another. They always had the Sangha. They always had their people around them giving support. All kinds of, it wasn't just the physical support, that was the least of it. It was the emotional and the mental support, the spiritual support, the fact that they could sit together in groups and recite their prayers and do their pujas and all of these things. All of this. So my situation was not a normal situation. It was quite unique for that time. And because of that, I found myself quite isolated. And that's just been that was just my karma there during that time. And I had to deal with that, and I did. But it was never something that was easy.
Extremely challenging, right? Extremely challenging. Maybe to the extremes, right? Sometimes some moments you must have gone through that must be very, very hard. You really need to be very stable mind to deal with that very directly in that precisely moment. Not easy at all.
Yeah.
Oh my. Yes, I can imagine. So tell me something. You decide to be lay practitioner, or you wanted to be a nun and then you change your mind?
You know, I had very unpleasant experiences as a child. When for a number of years my parents sent me to a Catholic nunnery. I was only a day student. I was not boarding there. But even as a day student, I just had very unpleasant experiences of those nuns. Unfortunately. And being so young, it stuck in my mind. I mean, I may have been wayward. You know, there were times when I was beaten, and I still have scars, you know, for things that at the time I felt were incredibly unfair and unjust. But in those days, even in the 60s, can you imagine now what would happen if that was the case? It just wouldn't happen now, you know. But they were real bullies, and that put me off Catholicism. It definitely put me off any kind of monasticism. And I was quite rebellious against all of that, including the whole Buddhist monastic situation. There was a brief moment when I thought, oh, maybe I should be ordained. And I asked Khyentse Rinpoche, and he said, oh, it's not necessary. I can give you the vows if you want, but it's not necessary. And I took that as meaning no. And then that was it. It never came up again. so I just...
You didn't insist.
No.
Your determination was not that. I understand very well, especially after all those experiences. Do you think...
You know, I had Chatral Rinpoche. I mean, I may not have had a lot of support because I was not monastically ordained, but he fed me, he housed me. On occasions, he gave me money. And above all, he gave me the most precious of things, which was the heart essence teachings. And that kindness from such a being. You know, what was there to doubt in that? There was no double take for me. I never had to rethink that. So I knew that he could see what I was. And he often spoke about that. He said, you know, so many people, you know, come and go, they're in robes, they look wonderful, but they're not practitioners. They don't practice the Dharma. they have all the appearance, you know, they're mouthing the prayers, fingering the mala, you know, reading the sadhanas. All the appearances are there. The head's shaven, the robes are all perfect, but they are not practitioners. And he pointed that out again and again and again.
Yeah.
And he was very unshakable on that point. He was very particular on that. And he could see, you know, all those that were coming to him, just, you know, what was what. And so he had quite a mixed bunch of us around him. You know, we were a mixed, odd bunch, for sure.
Yes, it's incredible. You know, I even brought tears to my eyes. I think it's so true, and it's so something we really must bring out in our days. It's just that people use robes like a fashion style, or the Napa Zen and all of that. Just like, I think proper meaning sometimes is missing, and proper practice also is very far away.
But
And
this is
those
what happens
realized beings, yeah, they
in
really,
all of the religions. This is what happens. This is
yes,
what happens.
that is
Unfortunately. True. Yeah. And in the East, most people wouldn't know this, but
yeah,
the majority of people in robes are pushed into that circumstance through no volition of their own.
yes,
It's rarer to find those who have come to the Dharma from their own inner volition.
yes, yes, yes.
However, many of those who had come to Chatral Rinpoche had come that way.
Mm-hmm.
So they had that in there, and therefore they could withstand the many challenges that they faced.
Yes.
And many of the lamas, many of the nuns, many of the practitioners were in the mountains under very, very trying circumstances.
Yes.
These were not easy living conditions.
No.
And you know, their retreat huts up in the snow in the winter their walls were plastic.
Wow.
Just thin plastic.
Yeah.
They cooked on little fire, you know, with wood that they had to collect from the forest, and they collected their water from the streams. And this included the Prince of Sikkim and various other, you know, dignitaries that came and
yeah,
undertook their retreats under Rinpoche's guidance.
Yes.
Nobody got special treatment.
Yeah, that is great.
It was all part of it. Yeah.
That is very interesting. And this is really, you know, like, how should I say? I don't know. It's kind of amazing. It's, I think, missing in our days. We really need to put our eyes in this kind of things. You know, it is no special treatment. It doesn't matter if it is the king of Sikkim or if it is the beggar over there. The purpose is the same. So, you know, only our minds do this catalog thing. It's kind of weird. Anyway, as a woman, I'm sure you must have faced such obstacles, like challenge situation, like feel your life threatened and feel not understand by the surroundings and feeling alone, not supported. Did you ever felt you want to give up?
Never. No. Prior to going into retreat, I faced very serious obstacles, including Chatral Rinpoche banishing me from the monastery.
Mm.
And this was all due to someone in the Sangha, you know, weaving little plots and making problems for me due to his own, it was a complicated situation. So when that happened, I think I reached a moment when I was really looking at what I was going to do. because the circumstances under which that had come about were extremely unfair from my perspective.
Yeah.
I could not justify them. I could not find anything to justify in that. I was simply banished from the monastery. And this was after having moved years in close proximity. You know, they were my family.
Yeah.
So just like that, I was out on the outside.
Yeah.
And I went to Bodh Gaya to deal with that time. I thought the only thing I could think to do was to go to the Bodhi tree and sit there and do Dorji Sempa.
Yeah.
Recite the Vajrasattva prayers.
Mm.
And it was such a traumatic time, Sonia. I couldn't sleep. I was devastated. And I didn't know if Rinpoche would ever accept me back in there again. But I knew I had to go back. So I went to Bodh Gaya for a period of 2 weeks and I did Dorji Sempa. And I prayed in front of the Buddha statue inside the stupa. So, you know, I was incredibly fortunate to be able to go there at a time when it was possible to do that. You know, one could lean up against the tree if you wanted to.
Yes,
you know?
yes.
And you could sit inside the stupa for hours on end, which is what I did. You know, we were soaked in blessing. And during the course of those days, I simply understood that I wasn't going to give up because I couldn't. What was I going to give up? And for what? You know, where would I go from here if I gave up what I had achieved so far?
Yeah.
If I turned my back on those connections, on that Sangha. Yeah. So it was like, it became apparent to me that wasn't an option. I could have done that, but I realized for me, that was not going to ever be an option because, I simply wasn't going to give up. So I went back to Rinpoche, and it was a very auspicious circumstance that took place at the moment when I met him, and it completely changed the whole thing. So I had, at Bodh Gaya, I picked up a tiny little statue. I think it was a Guru Rinpoche, and it had been molded. It was something that a lama must have molded. He'd molded a number of them, painted them beautifully, and then placed them on a stupa. And I had seen them when I was doing my rounds. And without even thinking, I had picked one up and put it in my pocket. And I had thought, I'm going to offer that to Rinpoche. It was just like, I have to give it to Rinpoche. There was no like, oh, I shouldn't take that. Or, there was nothing. It just leapt into my pocket, basically.
Incredible.
So when I encountered him that morning, and he was in Siliguri at that time, I had folded that statue into a kanda. And the first thing that I offered him with my two hands when I saw him, and he was just coming out of his room, he had another lama with him that I had never seen before. And I went straight up to him, shaking from head to foot, not sure if he was going to say, be gone.
Yeah.
I didn't know what was coming. I didn't know. And I'd just gone through a whole night, a bumpy night in the bus. I was exhausted and hungry and weak and sick and everything. Traumatized.
Oh my goodness, incredible. So you had such an amazing
statue. I had put the statue in front of him, and do you know what that lama had in his hand? He had exactly the same statue. Rinpoche had requested him a few days earlier to make those molds of that particular statue, and that lama had been endeavoring to do that, and he had been doing an imperfect job. So Rinpoche was on his way at that very moment to go downstairs to show him how to mold that statue correctly so that it would be perfect. Rinpoche never accepted shoddy work of any kind. He was very, very, very particular. And at that moment, I had come with this perfect statue. I mean, it was just so miraculous how that happened. And the minute he saw it, his face just lit up. It was like another sunrise. So
Incredible.
I knew that was the auspicious omen. I knew that everything would be fine.
Yeah.
And from that moment on, my relationship with Rinpoche completely changed. And then I went into retreat. He gave the teachings, you know, the transmissions directly, and that's when it all took off.
Yeah.
So if I hadn't gone through that, if I
Yes.
had turned my back, if I had walked away, can you imagine what I would have missed?
Yes.
I would have missed the most precious years of my life, for sure. So
so this is
that's my main message.
Yes, this
that's what my main message.
I was going to say that. Let's pick this advice after hearing all these words from you to the women that want to practice genuinely. Can you imagine if they go back before what they would have missed, just like you? You know, they never feel sorry to pass and gone through a lot of situations, a lot of difficulties. They should have strength and especially faith, devotion, and your devotion that move mountains. Like, I will not turn my back. I will go and bear everything until the end. This is just like what I call the mountain will. Is like a mountain. It's like, wow, it's unshakable. This is incredible.
And it has to be, Sonia. I mean, afterwards, of course, that changes. And one begins to understand that you know, there is no me doing any of this.
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing worth protecting.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You know.
Yes.
And that too is tested out in the most confronting ways.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah.
So
it's very challenging.
Nothing is left. No stone is left unturned. No stone.
Definitely not. It's incredible. It's incredibly how blessed you are, but also it's incredibly people take from these words how strong you are and determined you are and devoted you are, because you were able to just follow your heart, follow your devotion, follow your teacher's footsteps, and nothing was strong enough to shake that. It could be shaked, but never your devotion and determination. So this is something really huge, really admirable in our days. And your intention was not to be a lama or to do the retreats to be a lama or this or that. So even more deeply appreciated. Even you realize the difficulties of not wearing robes. I mean, your life could be much easier if you wear a robe and shaved your hair, as you said. But why? What for? Right? Incredible. Incredible.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to young women that want to follow Buddhist path and practice as a lay practitioners, Liz? What would be your advice to these women that want to follow this path in our days, that they have to face so many challenges?
Particularly in our times. And I mean, the circumstances in which women will come to the Dharma, you know, the world over, will be very, very different. So my advice would be, you know, that would cover all of that, is that you know, retain simplicity and be extremely clear about what's important. And if we really investigate that, we take the time to really investigate that, we can quickly strike out all kinds of superfluous things. and come to a very weighty, a very profound, essential recognition, which is really, this is the whole thing about the Buddha's teaching was, who are you? Discover what you are. And every great accomplished realized master from whatever religion will be pointing towards that. That's so simple, that's so fundamental, it's so basic. And I think if we, retaining that simplicity,
yes,
retaining the integrity of a strong, clear focus is huge in helping us get through so much stuff, because our lives are so complicated now on every level, so complicated, and that is not going to become less.
no,
Digital technologies, for one, they're not going anywhere, and there are extraordinarily positive things and extraordinarily negative things, and much in between, and that is yet to be figured out.
Yeah.
And practitioners coming in now are going to have to deal with all of that. And for that, they're going to need great clarity and strength, purpose.
Absolutely.
Enormous, because everything about the age in which we live is geared towards distraction. It's geared towards taking us away from what's most important. It's not geared towards taking us to that. And I think that's the very first thing we need to understand.
Absolutely. This is very true. So, how do you see Buddhism in the next 10 years, Liz? Do you believe young people are interested or motivated to practice the Dharma, the youth?
I think that most of the youth coming into the world now are being influenced by these digital technologies.
Yes.
And so this creates very special challenges. They're different from the challenges that you and I faced when we were growing up. You see, I had a perspective of life before digital technologies.
Yes, yes.
The 60s, the 70s, even the 80s. So I have I had the view of that. Young people coming in now have not had that.
Yeah.
They've pretty much been born with technologies in their face from the word go. And these technologies are intermeshed with our life on so many levels. And so to think that the Dharma is not going to be impacted by that would not be a true way to think. I mean, it will be greatly impacted. It is already being greatly impacted in ways that are tremendously good, and in ways that are also potentially can be very, very damaging.
Yes.
So they will have to negotiate all of this. And here again, the message of simplicity is a message that holds good, because particularly now, in the midst of all of this, we need that simplicity. Yes. And we need to understand how precious is our attention.
Yes. It is.
Because that is all that we have. The minute we lose that, we lose our interest in following the Dharma. Where's our interest?
Yes.
Yes. We come to some very fundamental things.
Yes. So you think in the next 10 years, we are going to have opportunity to take these technologies from a positive perspective and develop the attention and motivate.
That's my hope.
Yeah.
That's my hope. But each and every person coming into the Dharma is going to have to look at that and take that on themselves. This isn't going to be done for anybody. No. There's no quick fix. There's no weekend retreat. There's no app.
No.
There's nothing out there that's going to assist. And it's really going to become something that each and every person is going to have to address very, very consciously, very awarely,
Yes.
very with great focus and intent. And when I look around me now, I don't see interest in that.
Yes.
And I don't
Yes.
see young people with any clue even about that.
Yes.
They
That is
barely know they're
something.
alive.
Yeah. It is
And that's
something that
scary.
yes, this is something that this actual generations, they really need to put their eyes on this, because we are here just for a few days, and the next generation is coming, and if we don't prepare things and if we don't put our eyes on that, it's going to be very complicated, especially because we are going through this artificial intelligence area, and we are losing a bit our humanity in certain sense. So it's kind of complicated, especially to the Dharma and to the youth that should be
Mm,
motivated. Yeah. And that
mm,
have that
mm,
kind of particular energy that we all have when we have 20s, right? That kind of
mm,
sparkling and fire energy of
mm,
action, and
mm.
this, it's so important. And now it seems to be totally thrown to the screens. It's very, very
Yes.
worried. So it's very
Yeah,
worrying. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I believe so.
We're in a very precarious moment, and only
Yes, we are.
just beginning to find the language to deal with that. So I wrote a book called Are Smartphones Making Fools of Us All
Yeah,
in 2019. And that book is about that. It's about what we can do, you and I,
yeah.
not the big corporations, not somebody outside. It's
Yes,
about
yes.
yours and my responsibility to ourselves
Yeah.
and to our children. You know,
Yes.
what is it in our lives that's crucial here? You know, what do we stand to lose? Well,
Yes.
when we start looking at that, it's huge. It's a big one.
That is
So
the
yeah,
challenge. That is the challenge.
yeah.
And I think it's something that we need to pick at this
Mm,
moment, because every time, adds their challenges. World has changed so fast in the last 30, 40 years due to technology, and the approach of people doesn't matter where they are. The idea of time and space gets so diluted. So now we have to deal with that directly.
mm,
We just need to be aware of what we are generating and what we are creating, because humans create this. So, isn't it?
mm. And yet life is completely interdependent.
Yeah,
So there's
definitely.
we have a ways to go.
So tell me, to finish this wonderful talk, because it's almost 2 hours talking and it's incredibly, I could be here all morning. I would just like to know, Liz, why do you decided to start to write books? Because you mentioned precisely a book you wrote in 2019. Why do you decided to start to write books? Tell us about some of your books and the inspiration that was behind them, please.
Okay. Well, initially it was just an upwelling of wanting to share,
Mm,
basically. I didn't have a clear idea of how I was going to structure those books. I just started writing.
mm,
And I particularly wanted to be able to share experiences with my masters that could potentially inspire people coming into the Dharma that had not had the good fortune to meet them.
mm,
So this felt very important to me. So as I started writing, then things took shape. So the first book, Awareness Comes Knocking, is really a sort of history of how things came about and why. So that's very autobiographical. The second two books are experiences, a wide-ranging experiences within you know, the years that I spent with my masters and in different circumstances while, you know,
Yes.
practicing intensively, basically. And the last book in that series was really like a summary of the pith instructions that I received during those years and how I perceived them.
Yes.
So an explanation of that. The fifth book that followed, Who Lives, Who Dies, I regard as the most important book. And that's the one when I really get into the nitty gritties. It's really looking at the big issues and, you know,
Yes.
diving right in, basically. And then other books have come, they've just come, you know, things are keep popping up, and so I just keep writing. And
very good, very
yeah,
good,
so
I must say. Very, very good and very inspiring writing. So please keep going. It's incredible. So
thank you, Sonia.
really deeply, deeply felt. This is my genuine opinion. If you want to leave some
Thank you
message
so much.
to our women, to our youth, whatever you want to say before we finish this small conversation, I hope the beginning and the first of many in the near future. I would love to hear your advice, please. Your words. Here they are, please.
I think it's simply that, you know, basically, fundamentally, our condition is a very simple one. We exist, and that's a huge mystery, and we need to investigate the basis of that, because that's the basis of all spirituality, all authentic spirituality. We need to discover who and what we are. And as long as that's our lodestone, as long as we are moving towards that, then no matter where we are, no matter what we're doing, whether we're a lay person, whether we're an ordained person, whether we're in the East or whether we're in the West, it really doesn't matter. Whether we're 80 or whether we're 18. If we can hold that in front of us and keep that as the shining, burning light, then grace will flow and we will find our way. We will find our way towards greater wisdom and greater compassion, and towards the knowing of that which is most important to know in this life. It's just that. It's so, so simple. Who and what we really are. That's the whole point of it.
Thank you so much, Liz.
Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you for this wonderful talk, and thank you for your generosity in giving 2 hours of your time to talk with us. And I really appreciate your words, and I felt very inspired. As always, you can put tears in my eyes when you mention about certain kind of experience with high realized beings. It's incredible. I think only this was enough for everything. Sometimes we don't need much worse, isn't it? So
that's true. That's so true.
I deeply thank you from my heart, Liz. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And may all beings can benefit from our talk, and may all the merits can be shared with all. So this is just the meaning and the purpose of these conversations, is to bring some awareness. And if there are any merits here, may they be shared with all our brothers and sisters, and that can be positive in some aspect. If there is a seed already, good. So thank you very much, Liz. I wish you a wonderful night. I'm sorry to take your time again. You must be tired. So thank you. And we will see you soon again.